the meeting. I am an independent facilitator. I have a company, Coming and Company, and I have the opportunity to work with the city on a number of projects. So my role this evening is to help moderate the presentation to ensure that we have an opportunity to provide the information to you, and then to pull up your questions during the question and answer discussion period. We have over 90 people who had registered for tonight's session. I see we have about 41 who have joined us thus far, and I'm sure that there will be many more coming in the next few minutes. There's lots of things happening, and appreciate your taking the time this evening. So for this evening, this is an opportunity for the city to present to you an information update with respect to Pier 8 Block 16, and particularly the draft urban design work that has been done in conjunction with the city and with Brooke McElroy. So it's very much information that we'll provide to you, and hopefully an opportunity then for you to digest that information and share some comments and ideas. So you'll find up on your screen a few things just to orient you. So on your screen, you should see the welcome to the virtual information meeting if you're coming by your desktop, a laptop, or certainly by a phone. If you were to go down to the bottom of your screen where you see participants and click on that, a Q&A bar will come up. And that little Q&A box, if maybe one or two of you, there are 48 of you, could just give me a note that you've got it and you can see it. So at any time during our meeting, we would encourage you to type in the Q&A box. It could be a comment, it could be a question, and that's something that we will be referring to during our discussion. And it's a great place for you to put your ideas and information in. So I may have, if one person would be keen to do that, then we'll know that it's that you're able to access and put that information in. And what I would like to do is introduce the team that will be here this evening to provide the presentation to you. We have Christine Newbold from the City of Hamilton, Alyssa Mahood, and we have Jennifer Roth from the City of Hamilton. And we also have Chris Phillips from the City of Hamilton. Then from Brooke McElroy, we have Calvin Brooke, we have Victor Chung, and then we also have Wei Shi, and Wei He will be available to answer questions. So we will have a presentation that will last about 40 minutes. We'll try to be as succinct as possible. The first part of the presentation will be given by city staff to really bring you up to date and provide a status for you on why this work is being done and give you the fundamentals around the important pieces of it. And then we really want the opportunity for Brooke McElroy to walk you through the urban design work so that you can have a first-hand look at that. This presentation is being recorded, so we will be able to put the recording for you on the website. And that way you can go to Engage Hamilton, and if you can't stay for the whole time of the presentation, or if you want to come back to it, or if there's others that you wished would have had the opportunity to do so, that will be available to them to go on and click on the website and actually see the presentation. We will not be recording the Q&A part of it. The Q&A piece will be typed into the bar at the corner of your screen, but we will be recording all of those questions. We'll try our very best to get to as many as we can, if not all of them, in our discussion time frame. Those that we can't get to and those that we do get to, we'll put together in a frequently asked questions document. So we'll put that up on the website, and we'll also be creating a feedback meeting report. We want to make sure that we capture all of the input that you have from tonight. And finally, before we start the presentations, I also want to encourage you, there is a feedback survey. If you go to Engage Hamilton, you'll see where it said virtual meeting. Right beside it was a little bar to click on that said feedback survey. And there's about 8 questions that ask you some specific things about the urban design guidelines. If you have the opportunity to do that, it would be wonderful if you could do that and provide further information for the city and for Brooke McElroy to consider. So I see we have 57, 58, the numbers are coming up. I'm sure as we get started, we'll have others join us. So we certainly want to take the opportunity to welcome you and to carry on with the presentation. As soon as the presentation is finished, then I'll look to the Q&A, to the discussion that's in the Q&A bar, and begin to pull up those questions and comments and ask staff on your behalf those questions and comments, and also ask Brooke McElroy for their comment and input as well. So we hope that you can stay with us and join us for the balance of the evening until, of course, 8:30, no later, and we appreciate your time. So we have 60 people on, and Alyssa Mahood, I think you were going to start off from the city. Following Alyssa will be Jennifer Roth, and they'll be able to give you a perspective and context for the work that's ongoing. So if I could ask you to take the mic, then Alyssa, that would be excellent.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sue. I'm going to be really brief here and just say to everybody, welcome and thank you very much for taking the time tonight to participate in this weird virtual format that we have going on here. It's unfortunate that we can't meet in person to share the information that we have, but we're going to do the best that we can. And myself and Jen are always available. Afterwards, our information will be posted. You need to contact us directly if you want to ask some more questions or if there's something that you need some clarification about, send us an email or give us a call and we'll be happy to talk to you and walk you through the information that we have presented tonight. So next, I guess I would like to hand it over to Jennifer Roth, a planner with community planning, and she's going to give some context as to the background as to how we got to where we are tonight. Before we hand it over to Brooke McElroy, who will talk specifically about Block 16 on Pier 8 and some draft urban design guidelines that we have put together. Thank you, Jen. So I'm just going to stop sharing.
Okay. Good evening. Just going to share my screen now. Does that look good for everybody?
It can be seen well here, and I see we've got some individuals who've noted that everything can get into the Q&A box, which is really critical. So thank you for letting us know that.
Okay, excellent. So as everyone's introduced me, I'm Jennifer Roth, planner with community planning. I'll do this first staff presentation before handing it over to Victor from Brooke McElroy. So to give a general idea of the area that we're talking about tonight, this map on the slide shows Block 16 within the context of the West Harbor waterfront. The site is located on Pier 8, which is municipally known as 65 Guy Street East. The site is just east of the former Discovery Center and the existing Williams coffee shop. The aerial shows the site within the context of Pier 8, and it's generally identified by the red circle. Now, to provide some background, in April 2017, City Council approved the Pier 7 and 8 urban design study for the city-owned lands on Pier 8. The urban design study was guided by the policies of the Setting Sail Secondary Plan. The study contains recommendations for the design of the public areas and proposed buildings on Pier 8, as well as recommendations for updating the zoning regulations on Pier 8. On May 24th, 2017, based on the recommendations in the Pier 7 and 8 urban design study, Council approved a zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision for the city-owned lands on Pier 8. The purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision was to implement the Setting Sail Secondary Plan, land use designations, and the recommendations in the Pier 7 and 8 urban design study. Shortly after it was approved by Council, the zoning was appealed to the local planning appeal tribunal. However, through mediation, the parties reached an agreement to resolve the appeal. This agreement is contained in the minutes of settlement that was executed by the tribunal on September 16, 2019. These minutes of settlement can be found on the city's website. Now I'll transition to discuss some of the contents of the minutes of settlement. The minutes of settlement direct city staff to bring forward for council's consideration an official plan amendment to the Setting Sail Secondary Plan and an associated zoning bylaw amendment that will redesignate and rezone the existing institutional block 16, on Pier 8 to permit either residential or mixed use in a mid-rise or high-rise form. Although the LPAT settlement states that the city agreed to bring forward an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for Block 16 for Council's future consideration, there was no commitment for additional height on Block 16. Any decision for a change in land use or height will be made by Council through the statutory planning process. In addition to directing staff to consider a change in height and land use on Block 16, There were other key provisions that were outlined in the minutes of settlement which must be applied to any future development of the site. First, the maximum number of units that was approved in the zoning bylaw amendment from 2017 cannot change and must remain at 1,645 units. Therefore, regardless of any changes to the use or height on Block 16, the total number of units across Pier 8 cannot be more than 1,645. Excuse me. Another key provision is that 15% of all units built on all of Pier 8 must be family units. This amounts to approximately 195 family units, provided the maximum of 1,645 units is built. The family units are not additional units, but are counted within the 1,645 units. Through the settlement, family units were defined as residential units comprised of 2 or more bedrooms. Another key provision established in the minutes of settlement is that as building height increases on Block 16, so does the number of family units required to be provided in addition to the 15% of family units already required in the bylaw. For example, if a 28-story building was approved, 100 more family units are required, which would make the total number of family-sized units 295 units of the 1,645 units, which is the maximum number of units permitted on Pier 8. Another example, if an 8-story building is approved for Block 16, an additional 50 units are required, making the total number of family units 245 units of the 1,645 units. Now I'll transition to talk about how city staff will implement this direction from the minutes of settlement. Staff have broken the work into 2 phases that needs to be completed. We're currently in phase 1, which is the Pier 8 Block 16 Opportunity Study. This study involves the planning and urban design analysis and will result in the development of draft urban design, final urban design guidelines for mid-rise development, for a mid-rise development scenario and a tall building development scenario on Block 16. This urban design study has to be completed to address the policy requirement in the setting sail secondary plan, which states that prior to any zoning amendments to permit development on Pier 7 and 8, an urban design study determining height and massing must occur. The draft urban design guidelines will be presented after the staff presentation this evening. These urban design guidelines will be brought forward for council's approval. Once approved, the guidelines will provide a set of performance standards for how the design of a mid-rise or high-rise building should be evaluated. They will also be used to assist in the evaluation of the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for Block 16. So once the urban design guidelines have been approved, phase 2 will involve the preparation of an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment based on the analysis of the urban design guidelines developed in phase 1. The official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for Block 16 will be formally submitted by the Waterfront Office to the Planning Division for review. The development applications will be prepared and will proceed through the statutory planning process under the Planning Act. The process includes a statutory public meeting of the Planning Committee to consider any changes to the secondary plan and zoning bylaw for Block 16. To summarize what I've presented tonight, the bullets on this slide are 4 high-level points that we would like to emphasize. First, that the settlement decision of the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal directs the city to bring forward an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for a mid-rise or high-rise building for Block 16 on Pier 8. The second is an increase in height on Block 16 will result in an increase in family units on Pier 8. The third point is that what we are focusing on tonight are the draft urban design guidelines, which are the criteria that will be used to assist council in making a decision on a future application for Block 16. The development of draft urban design guidelines is phase one of our two-phase process. The last point I'd like to make is that council has the final decision on any land use or height changes on block 16. And this decision will be made through the statutory planning process under the Planning Act and is the second phase of the work needed to implement this settlement. So to be clear, we're in the middle of phase one and we're collecting feedback on this phase until November 19th. As you said, we'll encourage you over the next few weeks right after tonight to submit feedback via the survey on the city's webpage. After the commenting period is complete, a feedback report will be created detailing the input that we've received, and we'll make that available on the webpage as well. Based on the feedback provided, final urban design guidelines will be developed for Block 16 and presented to council for approval. This is expected to take place early next year. So thank you for listening to the staff presentation on the background and introduction of the Block 16 Opportunity Study. After the presentations this evening, we look forward to answering any questions. And now I'll hand it over to Brooke McElroy.
So thank you so much, Jennifer. And again, if you have questions and you wanted to start typing them in, you could do so. And while the presentation is being set up for Victor Chung, Victor is with Brooke McElroy, and he's going to walk you through the draft urban design guidelines. So Victor, I think you'll be able to share his screen in a few minutes. And we thank everyone as we work through this virtual way to present information to you. Excellent. We can see the slide. That's good.
Thanks, Sue. Hello, thanks for taking time to review the slideshow, which outlines the draft Pier 8 Block 16 Opportunity Study and associated urban design guidelines. This slideshow is being presented by me, Victor Chung of Brooke McElroy, urban design planning consultants who have been retained by the city to assist with the study.
Are you able to advance? There we go. Perfect.
In this slideshow, we will be presenting information on the geographic location of Block 16 within the West Harbor area, the purpose of the study, the considerations that have been applied to the study of Block 16, the height testing, the urban design guidelines, the draft urban design guidelines, that have been developed for mid-rise or tall building development on Block 16. This is the location of Block 16 within Pier 8. As you can see, it is located near the northwest corner of the pier. As described in the previous presentation, we are carrying out the study as a response to a settlement decision by the local planning area tribunal. The purpose of the study is to evaluate Block 16 as an opportunity site for a change in land use from institutional to residential or mixed use. This study will also evaluate the site for an increase in height to develop urban design guidelines and provide updates to the Pier 7 and 8 urban design study to reflect the outcomes of the above evaluation. The study is not taking a position or recommending a specific outcome related to height. However, it will provide information on urban design direction for a mid-rise scenario and tall building scenario on Block 16. The final materials will be presented to council for their approval, and if approved, will be used to assist in the evaluation of future development applications for Block 16. In the next couple of slides, we will highlight the planning context and considerations that have been applied to the study of Block 16. The setting sail secondary plan is the overarching guiding document for the Pier 7 and 8 urban design study. The secondary plan identifies the waterfront as an area of major change and the focus of physical improvements and developments. The Pier 8 Block 16 urban design study will continue to reinforce the principles from the secondary plan, including strengthening existing neighborhoods, create a diverse, balanced, and animated waterfront, enhance physical and visual connections, and promote excellence in design. Back in 2016, Council approved the Pier 7 and 8 urban design study. This study was prepared to guide the redevelopment of Pier 7 and 8 and to ensure that development is on keeping with the vision and guiding principles that were developed by the community. The vision and principles have also been applied to the study of Block 16. In particular, a mix of building heights are encouraged and the importance of a public parking strategy due to the anticipation that the site will become a key destination for residents and visitors. The visual prominence of Block 16 is noteworthy. It is visibility at the harbor's edge and from the McQuestion and Skyway bridges, both of which are gateways into the city. A building in this location has the potential to act as a visual beacon or landmark on the harbor. Block 16 is located at the far northwest corner of Pier 8 and is surrounded by 3 interconnected public green spaces. It is on an axis with the James Street corridor as an important commercial and retail corridor which spans multiple communities. Block 16 would function as a view terminus from downtown along James Street. Block 16 is a unique site because of the planned public realm improvements on harborfront location. A mid-block pedestrian connection linking the Greenway to the waterfront promenade between Block 16 and Block 1 is planned in addition to community recreational uses to the west. For Block 16, a series of universal objectives and guidelines have been created for both mid-rise and tall building options. These objectives include the following: focus on the unique site opportunities which provide a meaningful location for a landmark building, creating a visual anchor at the harbor that is emblematic of the harbor's renewal, capturing the public imagination by achieving a unique, high-quality building design that is exceptional, integrating green and environmental features in both the building and landscape design, creating a high-quality, accessible public realm with unique active uses at grade, providing a sufficient building envelope to ensure appropriate transition and sufficient separation distance to the plan and existing context, ensuring flexibility to support innovative architectural design forms and orientation. The first universal component of the guidelines is a mid-block pedestrian connection between Block 16 and Block 1, linking the Greenway to the waterfront promenade. It is recommended that that 3-story townhouse and live-work units should front onto this mid-block pedestrian connection. These units should have their entrances at grade and other design elements that will soften the transition between the private and public areas. The mid-block pedestrian connection is recommended for both a mid-rise or tall building development option. Another universal component of the urban design guidelines for both mid-rise and tall building options relates to the relationship between private and public areas, or what we call the public realm interface. The guidelines for the public realm include streetscape and landscape design, promoting an implementation of high-quality streetscape and landscape design to support vibrant public realm and street, integrating surrounding landscape elements into building design where possible. Public art, integrating public art into the site, streetscape, and landscape design. Public-private transition, ensuring an appropriate level of visual and physical access and overlook at the ground floor. Promoting human-scaled uses such as townhouse and live-work units at grade where possible. There are also urban design guidelines for landscape elements. These include building base, express the common shared uses in the base building or podium and include green elements and lighting. Total landscaped area at grade should be no less than 25% of the site. Public realm interface. Townhouses should front the pedestrian connection with at-grade entrances. These entrance areas should include landscape elements that mediate the interface transition between private to public. Adaptive balconies and terraces. Promote expandable, livable, and adaptive balconies for year-round use. The south facade should reference the greenway with green elements. Rooftop terraces. Another design component that is proposed for both mid-rise and tall building scenarios is bird-friendly design. Bird-friendly design provides best practice urban design measures that help to address and reduce the issue of bird collisions on buildings and structures. Bird-friendly design techniques can be achieved through lighting design, landscape design, siting, and building design. You've just heard about the objectives and guidelines that will apply to both mid-rise and tall building development on Block 16. Next, we will discuss these specific guidelines that would apply to a mid-rise building option and the guidelines that would apply to a tall building option. First, we will present the draft design guidelines for a mid-rise scenario. For a mid-rise building, the draft design guidelines propose a 5-meter setback above the third floor of the building. As illustrated in this slide, in order to reduce the perception of height and scale from the north property line and to mitigate pedestrian level wind impacts. The draft guidelines also recommend a 15-meter setback above the third story from the east property line. This setback will create an adequate transition in height and scale from the proposed development on Block 1 to the east. The draft guideline also recommend a 4.5-meter setback above the third floor in order to reduce the perception of height and scale from the south property line and the greenway. The building envelope for a mid-rise building should ensure appropriate transitions and sufficient separation distances to the surrounding development and public open spaces. In the diagram above, the blue dashed line represents the theoretical building envelope. A variety of building shapes, forms, and sizes can fit within the confines of the building envelope. The building envelope should provide flexibility to support innovative architectural design. This diagram demonstrates how the various draft guidelines that have been presented for the setbacks and stepbacks could look like for a mid-rise building at 12 stories in height on Block 16. This diagram illustrates the shadows between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. for a 12-story building. As you can see, the shadows move quickly from west to east throughout the day and will not have an adverse impact on the surrounding public and private spaces. Two views are displayed here looking north along James Street. The first is from Guys Street East. The second is from Burlington Street. A mid-rise building at 12 stories reflects a building shape and form that fits into the scale of the surrounding area. Now that we have presented the draft guidelines specific to a mid-rise building scenario, we are now going to present draft urban design guidelines for the tall building scenario. When considering a tall building scenario for Pier 8, a shift in the urban design role of the building on Block 16 has been applied. Whereas in the mid-rise building scenario, the building generally replicated the shape, form, size, and texture of the surrounding mid-rise buildings on Pier 8, a tall building in this location will create a visible landmark that will draw attention to the harbor front. As such, a tall building should be exceptional in design excellence. Through design, innovation, and creativity, the tall building scenario should reflect the aspirations of Pier 8 as a vibrant urban waterfront neighborhood, a place with a high quality of life and a tangible commitment to environmental sustainability. The following slides describe the draft guidelines for the tall building scenario. For the tall building scenario, the draft guideline recommend a 12.5-meter setback above the third floor in order to reduce the perception of height and scale from the north property line and to mitigate pedestrian level wind impacts. The draft guideline for tall building scenario also recommends a 15-meter setback above the third floor in order to reduce the perception of height and scale from the west property line and to mitigate pedestrian level wind impacts. The draft guideline for tall building scenario also recommends a 12.5-meter setback from the east property line to create an adequate transition in height and scale from the proposed development on Block 1. This would allow for minimum separation distance of 25 meters between the building above the third story between Block 16 and Block 1. The draft guideline for tall building scenario also recommends a 4.5-meter setback above the third story in order to reduce the perception of height and scale from the south property line and greenway. In considering a maximum building envelope for a tall building, we took the approach of using a height datum established by what is currently Hamilton's tallest building, which is Landmark Place in downtown Hamilton. This establishes a maximum height of 147 meters, which could translate to a 45-story building. The diagram illustrates the accumulation of all the previously mentioned minimum separation distances, setbacks, stepbacks, and maximum height, creating a building envelope for a tall building in Block 16. It is important to note that the envelope in the three-dimensional limit in which the building could be designed. There could be a variety of building shapes, sizes, forms that can fit within this envelope. The actual building will be much smaller than the envelope. Here you can see how we can test alternative building forms that all fit within the envelope. This image illustrates some of the draft guidelines that regulate the size of the actual building within the envelope. The draft guideline recommend that the average floor plate should be no more than 750 square meters. The guidelines also recommend that the tower floor plates from the 4th floor up to the 30th floor should be no more than 850 square meters, and the floor plate between the 31st and 45th floor should be no more than 650 square meters. The reduction in floor plate size as the building rises is meant to create a tapered profile that will result in a profile that replicates the form of a beacon. The 45 stories represents a theoretical maximum building height. Our study does not recommend a specific building height to be applied. At the base of the building, in the lower floors, where people are most visually connected to the building, the design should feature views into common areas such as the lobby, gym, and common rooms, and integrate green elements both inside and surrounding the building. For instance, trees, green walls, public art, and water features that visually engage the public. The creative use of feature lighting to enliven the space at night will also create a sense of activity and safety. Block 16 is located at the western end of the pedestrian greenway and has the potential to act as a visual gateway to this environmental feature. The south facade of the building is encouraged to integrate design features that reference green elements as a continuation of the greenway theme. The design of terraces are recommended to accommodate devices that support outdoor living, including deep balconies and movable shade and privacy screens. The draft guidelines are recommending that the tower top be visually prominent and function as a harbor beacon. Exterior feature lighting is also encouraged to create a distinctive landmark harbor beacon. Sustainability factors should be considered in the design of the building. The impact of wind should be considered early in the design process, and appropriate mitigation strategies should be sought. The building should also encourage sustainability and the reduction of energy consumption. The diagram demonstrates how the various draft guidelines that have been presented for setbacks and stepbacks could look like for a tall building at 45 stories in height on Block 16. This diagram illustrates the shadows between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. for a tall building scenario. As you can see, the slender shadow moves quickly from west to east throughout the day. The shadow impact on a taller building does not cause excessive incremental impacts when compared to the mid-rise shadow, as the majority of shadows fall into the harbor. This slide illustrates the view of a tall building on the harbor from the McQuestion Bridge. This slide illustrates the view of a tall building on the harbor from the Skyway Bridge. Two views of the tall building scenario are displayed looking north along James Street. The first is from Guy Street east, and the second is from James Street north near Luna Station. This concludes the presentation on Pier 8 Block 16 Urban Design Guidelines. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the presentation, and we look forward to receiving your feedback.
Excellent. Victor, thank you. You may want to keep your presentation handy in case you need to refer to it in comments and questions. Just want to make sure that Alyssa Mahood was unmuted as well for any question answering. Great. So I want to thank everyone. It is 7:35, which gives us lots of time for having your questions read out and some answers. Alyssa, was there anything you wanted just to confirm before we start into our Q&A?
No, I think we're ready.
Okay, excellent. So thank you. A number of you have put questions in. I also want to note that there were 4 questions that were put on the website in advance of the meeting. And so if you did ask a question there, it has been answered by city staff. So an answer has been provided to you. Those are actually viewable for everybody. So everyone could go there and see those answers. So I want to start with the first question. I'm not going to give your names. I'm just going to indicate what the questions are. First one was, what effect will a tall building have on the rest of Pier 8? Will the urban design or built form be affected? So that would potentially go to Calvin Brooke from Brooke McElroy. And that's at 7:18, Calvin, if you needed to see those words.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. Does have an impact in the sense that any units built on block 16, that unit count would be deducted from the remaining units on the remaining blocks for Pier 8, because we have a cap of 1,645 units. So what it means is that it reduces, potentially reduces the scale of some of the other development, which is pretty evenly about 8 stories across Pier 8. So Pier 8, the design of Pier 8 is basically based on 8-story maximums. But if more units go into block 16, which was not originally designated for residential units, it means there's more flexibility and a variety of heights, potentially below 8 stories on those remaining blocks.
Calvin, thank you for the response. I do note that there's a second question that relates to this. So if Pier 8 cannot exceed 1,645 units, how will this affect the original drawings and suggestions for the remaining blocks? It would appear as close to half of the units will be in these high-rise buildings. You may have just answered that, but
sure. I mean, I guess I should just correct the last comment. I think at the very most, the number of units in the tall building scenario would be in the 300 to 400 units. So it certainly wouldn't be half. It would be, something like 20% or 25% at the maximum. And again, what that does is it kind of relieves the pressure on the other blocks for the number of units they are providing, because we're capped at 1,645. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Another question is, why is there not going to be green elements on all facades? Calvin, you're on the hot seat.
Well, we certainly are encouraging green elements. And one of the recommendations of the guidelines are for balcony and terraces associated with each unit that are actually deep enough and big enough to allow an occupant to have outdoor landscape elements and to use it as a kind of expansion of their living area. So we would encourage green elements throughout the building. We are specifically mentioning in the guidelines the south facade, first of all, because from a practical level with southern exposure, the ability to actually grow planting is much more viable. But secondly, from a kind of visual prominence perspective, we really wanted to take this idea of the view looking down James Street, focusing on a building that had these green elements. but it's a good comment. I mean, it's something that we could explore expanding that as a kind of desirable outcome for all sides of the building.
Great. Thank you. We have another question here. The original designs had Block 16 as a market area, entertainment area, etc., for the inhabitants of Pier 8 as well as for the public. Will there still be these services for Pier 8? Not sure if that's a question to city staff.
Yeah, Alyssa Mahood here. So Pier 7 and 8 design study actually treated Block 16, they called it Block A, and it was the institutional site on that block. So you may be referring to the properties just over to the west, which includes the Waterfront Trust Center or the former Discovery Center, the rink and the pub in that area and the Green Promenade. So that is all still remaining. There's no change to those lands. These lands were always identified as institutional and institutional in the secondary plan. So they were also referred to as such in the urban design study. I know, Calvin, if you have anything else to add to that, or Chris.
I might keep going because we have a lot. Calvin, go ahead. I think you want to say something. We have about 16 more questions to go so far. But Calvin, if you wanted to add to that, please do, and I'll keep going.
Yeah, so I mean, so far what we've looked at is the potential for residential and live work kind of residential units on this block, which was pretty much consistent with the guidance for this study as a kind of non-institutional site. I think there certainly is the potential for some of the uses at the base of the building to be non-residential uses, but that would be up to the final development proposals.
Okay, thank you. So I've got 3 comments coming up. I'm going to give all 3 comments at once, and that way there may be some response or input from the city staff or from Calvin. So the first one is, this is an incredible opportunity to build something aesthetically beautiful that fits in with the environment immediately around it. To consider putting a prominent angular building beside a large water feature makes no sense to me. So that's one individual's perspective. The second comment, a different individual said, the ratepayers, in brackets city residents, have already voiced their desire for a maximum, in capitals, height of 4 stories for the West Harbor Recreation Master Plan area. We don't want height increases, and these requests from the city staff undermine the values of residents, are insulting and unnecessarily time-consuming. I'm going to keep going. Why is city staff making draft guidelines for tall building scenario? We don't want any increase in height that blocks out views from the escarpment and any building south of Barton Street. So the first comment that I read out related to that it makes no sense from this person's perspective to have a prominent angular building beside the large water feature, looking for something more aesthetically beautiful to fit in with the community. And then there's a question or comments raised with respect to the height and the city's position at this point on this. So potentially we could start then with city staff, and if Alyssa, you had an opportunity to review those. Are at 7:34, and we'll also have maybe a comment from you, Calvin, coming up after that on the fitting in of the building.
Thanks. So as Jen had mentioned in her presentation, the staff to undertake this study came out of the LPAT settlement decision. So at the end of the day, we are looking at developing performance standards for a mid-rise and a tall building. Right now, there is no policy framework to help evaluate any change in height on this site. So the direction from the settlement was that staff would bring forward an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for council. So we're trying to put together the parameters or the design guidelines and the criteria, the checks and balances that will help council make a decision, whether it be a decision to support an increase in height on that site or to deny. But we have no tools right now, and going right from the LPAT decision to an official plan amendment could be difficult. There could be a lack of, the the information and the policy requirements that the council would need to either approve or deny. It doesn't mean that right now we are neutral on whether or not we're not approving a tall building in this location, but we are analyzing both the mid-rise and the high-rise to provide that design direction. Once the study is complete, then it will be up to the Waterfront Development Office to prepare their official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment and bring that forward for council to consider. And then as well, the public would have an opportunity to make their delegations as to whether or not they want to see a tall building or a mid-rise building in this location, whichever one is one that's applied for. The thing we have to think about here is we have to make sure that if council is in a position to support such a development, that they do have the criteria and the checks and balances and the best practice information for any increase in height and design on this does fit in with the community, and that the best components of that tall building or mid-rise building or whatever it is, even if it's a 6-story building, that it does fit in with the neighborhood and that it provides a benefit to the community.
Thank you, Alyssa. I know there's a follow-up question that says, in plain English, City Council has the right to veto a high-rise if they choose. Correct? ? I think you've answered that question, but maybe just in if you could restate it, that would be great.
It is correct. And right now, we aren't saying that, that we're not taking a position and recommending a height at this point, but we are providing performance standards for increase in height, and council will make that final decision. So they could approve or deny it.
Great. I hope that clarifies the information. There are 2 questions here, and I will come back to Calvin at some point on your thought on the impact around this. 2 questions on bird safety. The one was, bird safety and migration paths need to be considered when exterior lighting is planned at water's edge. And another individual said, is there consideration of bird-friendly design materials for the facade treatment of any buildings? Perhaps we could consider those 2 questions together. Calvin, I probably would go to you for that in terms of the bird-friendly guidelines and a consideration of the lighting with respect to bird safety and migration. Those are at 7:36 and 7:36 same time.
Yeah. Thank you. So as architects, we're very familiar with techniques for basically making buildings very visible to birds. So it has to do a lot with the treatment of glass. Sometimes means the reduction of the amount of facade that is glass, avoiding reflectivity, and in glass, making sure that there are kind of visual patterns that a bird knows that that's an obstruction to avoid. In terms of the lighting, I think that's a very valid point, and it would have to be something that was looked at carefully through studies, which could potentially mean the modulation of light, the periods when light is not on the building, or potentially at certain periods not illuminating the building to the extent that it becomes a hazard. I think in my experience, being able to see the building at night actually helps in terms of the bird being able to avoid the obstruction. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Calvin. There's a question here on transportation. I'm going to leave that for just a moment but I will promise to come right back to it. The next question relates to, or comment perhaps, is these sound like boilerplate urban design guidelines. Sorry, Calvin, boilerplate urban design guidelines. When it comes to a final design, what assurance do we have that it will be exceptional rather than mediocre? So that's to you, Calvin, and then I'm going to come back to the transportation one after that.
Well, I know where the comment is coming from, and I don't think they're boilerplate guidelines. I think they are pretty specific, and they will be published on the website. So we weren't able to provide you with all of the detail I would say, however, that I agree urban design guidelines do not guarantee an exceptional building. There will have to be a process of design review that I think is above the normal process to ensure that this building, in whatever form it takes, be it mid-rise or tall, is exceptionally beautiful and is a positive contribution to Pier 8.
Okay, thank you. There was a question about transportation, and it said, what transportation options are envisioned both for the residents and for those who visit the site?
So I guess I could try to take a stab at that. So we all know that there's SAR that's available for transit, but maybe this question is more in relation to a taller building or any building development on block 16 that wasn't anticipated before, because that may create more units. But just going back to what Jen had said in her presentation, we're not increasing the approved number of units, so that wouldn't change the traffic impact on Pier 8 because it still has to stay under 1,645. But the city is also looking at the provision of parking facilities at the waterfront. So possibly with the development of Block 16, there could be some opportunities for an underground park that could assist with some of the parking issues for the waterfront and for those who would be visiting.
Great. Alyssa, while you're there, there's two other questions a little further on that relate somewhat to this, and then I'll come back to the ones I've just missed. So block 16 is now where everyone parks. Where is the parking going to be for the Williams, and skating, etc.? Was a question that also came up.
Right. Actually, I might defer this to Chris Phillips because he's
Great.
actually been working on sort of that parking strategy for the whole Pier 8 and Pier 6-7 area.
Great. Chris, if you could join us, that would be great. And if you're looking for the question, I can repeat it, or if you are good to go.
I'm good to go, I think. So the initial parking for Pier 8 in the short term won't actually change at all. In fact, there'll be more parking on Pier 8 over the short term than there's ever been down there before, as the different development blocks actually are graded and allow for short-term parking. I think it's important, though, to remember that this block 16, which, yes, in fact, is where some of the parking is for Williams, for the ice rink, is actually a development block in this plan. Whether that development block is a two-story institutional building, or whether that or whether that ends up being a mid-rise or high-rise residential building, the parking will change over time as the development progresses. We are looking for adding parking both within the confines of Pier 8 and part of the development with Waterfront Shores, and the city is also looking for additional parking structures over in the Pier 6-7 area.
Great. Chris, thank you. There may be other questions for you in a short while. I've got a question I'm coming back to. It says clarification of the proposed building separations of 25 meters between the tower faces. Some municipalities require 30 meters. So that's likely a question for you, Calvin. We're looking to a clarification then if in terms of why 25 meters was selected when other municipalities might require 30.
Yeah. So the thing to keep in mind is that what we're separating are at most an 8-story building on block 1 and a taller building in the tall building scenario on block 16. So the separation distance does not apply to 2 towers. It applies to a fairly mid-rise building and a tower. Given that, we thought 25 meters was sufficient, but it's also important that the guidelines state that 25 meters is to the edge of all structure, including balconies. In other municipalities, that separation distance allows the balconies to penetrate those 25-meter separation or 30-meter separation distances. So we feel that sufficient as a separation distance.
Okay, thank you for the question and for the comment. I've got a comment here. It says the public had input into the proposed development of Pier 8. So it's a comment that is noted. We thank you for your comment. And if you have a further question, you may enter that, but it's certainly important to note that the public did have input into the proposed development of Pier 8. Another person asked a question, if I'm standing at King and James, can I see a 30-story building versus a 45-story building? That's a really good question. Everyone's smiling. I think Kelvin's smiling. Do you want to think about that and we'll come back to that question?
I think the answer is yes, you would see it. But
so would you see that a difference between a 30-story or a 45-story was the question if you're standing at King and James?
You would see both of them. Obviously, 45 stories would be taller.
Okay.
Yeah, but you would see both.
Okay. Another question here is going to keep going down. Sorry, scrolling away. Could you please clarify the building setbacks at sidewalk level and the available street tree plantings available and the pedestrian walkway areas? That's at 743. So clarification on the building setbacks at sidewalk level and the available street tree plantings available and pedestrian walkway areas.
So it's different depending on what side of the building we're on. If we are on the east side between Block 1 and Block 16, in the mid-rise scenario, we have a 12-meter setback or separation distance between the two. The tall building scenario, we have a 15-meter separation distance, which as a pedestrian corridor would include all kinds of landscaping. On the other three sides, we have setbacks from 3 to 5 meters. However, we're also stipulating a minimum of landscaped open space. So we would anticipate that the design would have some areas that would be substantially more than those minimums, which would provide opportunities for extensive, more additional tree planting and landscaping on all four sides.
Okay. And as you said, perhaps when people have a chance to see the guidelines and draft, they'll be able to look at that in even more detail and may have subsequent questions. They can put those on their website. So I've got a couple of questions here. What is the desire for a high rise opposed to a lower level? That's one question. So I'm not sure if that's, Calvin, that's something you could comment or Alyssa maybe?
I can start off and just mention that,
okay.
I mean, as per the minutes of settlement, as Jen said, so the more stories that are approved, the more additional family-friendly units is what they're calling them, would be provided across Pier 8, and meaning units with 2 or more bedrooms. So that is one thing that would be a result of increased height on this block. And then the other thing I could notice, just again, there could be opportunities for some public parking facility that could be built into the development with block 16.
Okay.
Alvin, do you have anything else?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that what's driving this has to do with building in incentives for more family friendly units.
There's a question or comment here from a member of the public. It says, just to confirm, the increase in height of the tall building would lead to proportional increase in family units? Question mark. This would do well to support the city's motto as a great place to raise children and North End being a family-friendly neighborhood. So I think you've just answered that question, Alyssa, in terms of what that motivation had been considered to be. I've got another question here related to active transportation, Chris, at 747. So does concentrating dwellings on a single block of Pier 8 change how motorist traffic enters and exits the pier? And how can a protected active transportation network help to reduce motorist impact? So I'm not sure if that's a question for Calvin, for you as a design piece, or whether city staff. We can see you smiling, so maybe we'll give you a chance first. And
yeah, it's a good question in terms of if you've got a kind of concentration of units on the west side, what does that mean in terms of residents, for instance, coming to the building? And there are many options. One of the things that we've been recommending is the potential for Block 1 and Block 16 below grade parking to be combined as one unit. And what that does is it gives us many options for how people get into the parking garage and could provide more than one entrance. So the advantage of that is it dissipates the concentration of traffic from one entry and exit point into various routes, which would, of course, lessen the pressure on the road network to have everybody using the same pathway.
Great. And I think part of the comment too was around the active transportation network. So maybe that's a comment that can be taken away and reflected on in some of the staff work with respect to ensuring good active transportation within all of Pier 8. Alyssa, did you have a comment on that, or should I carry on? I'm going to carry on.
Sorry, I was just going to say that that's noted too about the active transportation,
Right,
and we're working with our staff in
Great.
transportation planning as well.
Great. And we do really appreciate these comments and questions. There are things that you're bringing to attention that are important to note and consider. So that's part of the part of having that input from you is really critical. So we appreciate that. I'm going to keep going because I want to make sure we get to most, if not all, of your comments and questions this evening. So there was one here. It said, would a panelist identify the connection of the building size to the significant increase in family-friendly housing on Pier 8? So I think that was done. I think Alyssa has indicated that, and reduced density next to the existing homes. I don't know that you commented on that part of it. That's at 746.
So the density is not changing. There would be a reallocation of units based on, depending on, what height is approved for Block 16, if any height is at all. So there's going to be no change to the zoning bylaw for the rest of the pier. Everything would remain the same, but you could see a real allocation of where units are. So like I think Calvin had mentioned that maybe some of the other massings of buildings could be lower because units are now being provided on Block 16, but the density is not changing with this reallocation.
Great. Thank you for that, Alyssa. The follow-up or another question here or comment is, if a tall building is approved, does the existing planning framework permit a second or third building, or does the 8-story limit continue to apply to the rest of Pier 8? I think you partially answered that.
Yeah, so no, there will be no other changes. So the purchase and sale agreement and contract between the developer and the city is that they cannot change the zoning or official plan on the rest of the lands on Pier 8. So there won't be any changes to that. As everyone knows, there's a parkland to the west of this block, Pier 4 Park and Bayfront Park, and then to the east of the Pier 8 lands, we have the Bayfront Industrial Land. So this site can only accommodate one tall building. If that was the case, it's not large enough to actually accommodate two. And I see Chris Phillips has popped in here as well. So I'm not sure if you had something you wanted to add to the agreement between the city and the purchaser.
No, I think you covered off right. I think the key, though, to remember on this, and Alyssa, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the settlement actually ingrains the zoning on all the other blocks. We are simply talking about Block 16 in this context. All of the other blocks are exactly as is with the original zoning.
Great. Thank you for clarification. I'm going to keep going. Another question is, will you be considering light pollution and sightline interruption to current residents? That's at 749.
So what we've done is we've actually tested various views from the surrounding neighborhood. And those have been documented in the guidelines. So as Victor's presentation pointed out, is yes, you will be able to see a building on block 16 if it's a mid-rise building. And you will see even more if it's a tall building. You know, in terms of light pollution, I think that could be that would be an analysis that would have to be done to make sure that it wasn't adversely impacting the surrounding neighborhood from a light pollution perspective.
Great, thank you. Thank you for these questions. They're excellent. Follow-up comment here from someone. It said, exceptional comes back to my comment on angular versus innovative and beautiful. So obviously some input on the perspective of design and what would be exceptional. And that may very much relate to how do you ensure that it's not a mediocre building. So that's at 7:50. Kevin, I'll give you a moment to think on that one because I want to go on to a few questions here that Chris Phillip could potentially answer, or Alyssa. The next one is, what is the timeline for the promenade completion? That's not specific to what we're talking about this evening, but it may be possible to have some clarification on that.
Yes, the Pier 8 Promenade Park, which is Cops Pier when it opens, wraps all the way around the periphery of Pier 8. It's already under construction. If you're down on the site, it's the blue construction fence that's going on. Underground works are going on right now, and it'll be open by July of 2021.
Thank you, Chris. You may want to take this question too. Will the parking for the Harbor West Marina be eliminated? And there's a question here about what about parking for the public, the individuals that have a boat at the marina and the residents?
So there's no specific parking for any one of the marinas. All of the parking itself is actually communal. The areas of Pier 6 and 7, which I think maybe the question is talking to, yes, that parking will be eliminated as we construct the new Pier 6 and 7 open public space with a shoreline, new shoreline work, and a brand new almost kilometer water's edge boardwalk that'll be a beautiful kind of a new amenity for the public. The marina parking will be accommodated in the short term. As I said before, there's plenty of parking that will happen on Pier 8. As the Pier 8 development works over time, the city will be looking at parking alternatives, and that alternative is looking for over by the Royal Hamilton Yacht Club, Leander Boat kind of area.
Great, thank you, Chris. There's a few more questions here with respect to cars and transportation. An individual writes, but why just assume car as a transportation option? Why not look into better mass transportation and more frequent bus service? And I believe, Alyssa, you mentioned the transit was something that the city is looking at in terms of the service levels. So maybe it's something that can be referenced here. There's also another question. Are there plans to expand public transit to link Pier 8 with West Harbor Station or Hamilton Go? We need to encourage public transit for residents and visitors. And another question about parking. How will the city build a parking structure at Pier 6/7 if those properties are currently for sale? So maybe, I'm not sure, Chris, if you have a comment on any of those as someone involved in the site.
Sure. So Pier 6/7 land sale, just so that we're clear, is only 4 very specific development blocks on Pier 6/7. And that is not specifically where the parking is today. In fact, one of the building blocks that is for sale is where the police marine unit area is. So that is actually already occupied with something today. It'll be transitioned over time as a development block. The parking structure that the city has identified within the rec master plan would be to build a new parking structure somewhere over, as I said earlier on, around Leander Boat Club, Royal Hamilton Yacht Club area.
Okay, thank you. And Alyssa, do you have any further comments on any of the transportation pieces as to how city staff are looking at those?
Yeah. I don't at this time, but it does make sense to have a connection to the GO station. So that's something that we will get back to in our comments section when we're finished this meeting. I'll get that answer for you.
Okay. So there's a comment here that says city staff can veto the height request, exclamation mark. Wow. So city residents have already said that they don't want height increases and was adopted into the master plan. Are you placating developers' desires over all the historical concerns of city residents? So obviously, I think that's an important one, Alyssa, for you and potentially for Chris to clarify. That's at 7:55.
I guess I'll begin as it relates to the settlement. I think it's important everybody to know that actually the groups that actually appealed to the LPAT were actually citizen groups. So they're the ones who are at the table, and that the city staff, approved by council, did not commit to changing the height specifically. The idea was that in order to get the development going and get it kind of moving, we needed to solve the issue that was before the land planning tribunal. And so therefore there was a settlement between the parties. This is one of the processes within the process to go ahead. And ultimately it'll go through a planning act process, as was said in the opening presentation, to where the public will have their say. Council will ultimately decide what they want to do in the future of this specific thing. I would say, though, that the settlement was a balance between a bunch of different interests. This just happens to be one of the issues.
Okay, thank you for that, Chris. And I understood you mentioned that the LPAT decision is actually on the Engage Hamilton site as well, so people can have access to that information. There's a question here about, would the underground construction accommodate the required tree planting depths? So that would be something potentially going back to Calvin. Calvin, that's at 7:57. So would the underground construction accommodate the required tree planting depths?
Yes, absolutely. So in the case where we have a below-grade parking structure, but we have landscaping or planting above, it's quite common to be able to design the concrete structure to allow a minimum of 5 feet of soil depths in linear trees, which will support healthy, mature tree growth. And yes, that would be required.
Okay. And so the question I asked you earlier, Calvin, since you're still there, relating to the angular plane, was related back to bird safety and migration paths and the exterior lighting at the water's edge. So that question, a further comment that was noted related to that. I don't know if you have any further comments that you might.
I think the comment had to do with angular versus
Innovative and beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a very interesting perception. We actually have, I don't know if you noticed in Victor's presentation, we modeled 3 different kind of building forms within the building envelope. The one and the third one is curvilinear. It's a kind of oval shaped building, which actually has a very interesting advantage in terms of its ability to mitigate wind. So wind hitting the building on a flat surface tends to kind of hit the ground in a more impactful way, where a curvilinear building will actually dissipate wind. So that is something that we have commented on in the guidelines as potentially a preferable kind of form for a tall building. Whether that is more innovative or beautiful, I think is a subjective opinion, but it's an interesting viewpoint.
Okay. Thank you, Kelvin. And then with respect to the required tree planting depths, I think you mentioned that that was covered off in the presentation that Victor had given. So would underground construction accommodate the required in the event that the depths that are there? You may have addressed this already.
Yes.
Okay.
I think so.
Great, thank you. Another question is this proposed building a rental unit or condo for purchase? I guess we'll maybe ask Chris,
so
Philip,
I
or
guess
sorry, Alyssa.
Going back to the basics is that right now there's no building proposed. We're developing the draft urban design guidelines. But if something was approved on site, I'm not sure. Maybe Chris knows more due to his relationship with the developer, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, in the end of the day, this is a private sector development that'll happen on these lands. It'll be their determination whether or not what the actual tenure is of the building. I think it's fair to say, though, a key thing to remember about this site is that there is actually a requirement of 5% of the units to be actually affordable units, which was part that the city actually put in to its RFP on these lands. So something to kind of remember that in order to diversify the population on Pier 8, 5% of the units need to be affordable in nature. The Waterfront Shores' proposal actually had Habitat for Humanity Hamilton being part of that solution. And then you add that with the commitment of at least 15% family size units, and you start to see how there'd be diversity on the site.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Now I'm going to continue on. Where would parking be located for the residents of a tower? It's not realistic to have underground parking there because of the water table. So, question mark. So there's an assumption made that you wouldn't be able to put the parking there because of the water table. And so where would that be located? Kelvin, I believe you were talking about putting the underground structure. So maybe that's a question that you've considered.
So
Just wait till his mic catches up to the rest of us.
are you still with me? I just
we lost you for a moment,
froze.
but you're back now.
Okay. Going more than one level of below-grade parking on this waterfront site is expensive, but it is feasible from a technical perspective. If this was a tall building site, we would be going probably at least 2 stories down. As I said, as a way to kind of spread out the area of the parking garage, combining it with block 1 is a strategy that would seem to be able to accommodate the parking for both block 1 and block 16 in something like a 2-level low-grade garage. So it is feasible. It costs more money. From an economics perspective, I suppose the tower helps offset those costs.
Okay. Thank you, Cal. There seems to be a number of questions or comments that relate to things like, is the parking going to be paid parking? I think that's too early to tell from what I'm hearing from the panelists. That's something that there is no building yet, as Alyssa indicates, so that's something that may be further considered in the future. Another individual writes, why not put family-friendly units in the proposed Pier 8 plans? Why would families want to be on a 35-story building potentially? I'm not sure if that's a comment from you, Calvin, or whether Alyssa.
Yeah. So I don't think the fact that having more units on block 16 does not necessarily mean that those family units are on block 16. It just increases the requirement across all of Pier 8 for more family units. So in our guidelines, we have recommended at least 10% of units in a mid-rise building or a tall building be family friendly. But we would expect the family unit to be spread out in multiple buildings on Pier 8. And in fact, the best place for family friendly units are on the lower floors of buildings. So I would expect us to see the bulk of those units on multiple buildings in the first kind of 2 or 3 floors.
Great. Alyssa, did you have anything to add to that from the city's perspective? It was a good clarification.
I agree with Calvin. Yeah, the units would be distributed across Pier 8, so it wouldn't all be in the tower if there was one improved.
Great, good questions. I'm going to continue on. Someone asked if the units would be allowed to be rentals, and were they allowed to be Airbnb? So those potentially, Chris, I think you answered that that's not known at this time.
Yeah, I mean, they'd be allowed to be rentals, yes. As far as the Airbnb, the city has a bylaw specifically related to short-term rentals, and I would imagine whoever the owners of those would have to comply to that.
While you're still there, Chris, there's a question here that says, has Pier 8 actually been sold to the development consortium yet?
Council, we went through an RFP process, chose the Consortium of Waterfront Shores. Council approved that. We're in the final throes of negotiating the actual contract between them. I want to be clear, the land was never going to be sold all in one foul swoop. We were actually going to sell the block by block to the developer, and those transactions will happen over time.
Okay, thank you. And we appreciate that you're here to answer some of those questions, noting that the urban design is the subject of tonight, but obviously other questions that relate to this. So with a question here, or maybe it's a comment, I'll read it out. Green buffer zone setbacks ought to be 30 meters. Where is there a 5-meter, 16-foot balcony in other urban scenarios? Most architectural designs have 2.5-meter balconies. So I think in the presentation that was referenced, Calvin, that Victor provided, indicating potential for bigger or wider balconies. So the question here relates to that, which is at 8 p.m.
Yeah, so just for clarification, I think the 5-meter setback that Victor referred to is a step back of the building above the 3rd story. That is not a balcony. That would be, I suppose, a roof terrace at that point, which could be used as common outdoor amenity space for the residents of the building. I agree, most architectural designs have 2.5-meter balconies, and that actually is the average balcony depth that's in the guidelines. On the south side, we've encouraged balcony depths that are, I think, average at 2.7 meters, so slightly deeper.
Great, thank you for that. I've got a comment and a number of other questions to continue on, so let's keep going. It indicates here height increases over 4 stories will reduce actual views of the water from King and James or anywhere within the sight lines of the waterfront. So that's a comment, obviously, for consideration. So an individual's view that height increases over 4 stories will actually reduce views of the water from King and James or anywhere from the sight lines. So that's something to be noted. There's a question here about any higher floor. Who will be able to afford these units? The public made their comments known on the existing Pier 8 plans. This did not include a tall tower, and the person referenced that it's disappointing to have the idea come forward now. Hopefully there was some clarification provided to you as to how that's been coming forward and why it's coming forward. And potentially at the end, we'll have Alyssa just summarize the pieces to what, again, the city are looking at. Question here about, keep going, the public transit questions are excellent and top of mind, need to be addressed. In addition, what considerations are there going to be made for bike paths? And there was a further comment about by parking structure. Do you mean an above ground parking structure? I think you may have answered that, Calvin, in your earlier comments, but potentially the questions then related to transportation would be helpful if we could have a comment or response from either you, Calvin, Chris, or potentially Alyssa.
I would, if I can just clarify in terms of parking structures associated with the residential buildings and on block 16. No, it would not be above grade. It would be all below grade.
Okay. Was there any?
Maybe
go ahead, Chris.
Maybe I can just jump in about the bike kind of element. I want to make sure that that it's kind of clear that although we're talking about block 16 here tonight, there is a massive amount of bike cycling infrastructure and active transportation infrastructure that's both in place today and quite frankly has been for years and being enhanced as we go. So the periphery of Pier 8 Park is a great example that will have multiple trails, multiple avenues for people to both cycle, rollerblade, jog, as well as be able to meander along the edge. The new Pier 6-7 area will have a trail that, yes, wraps around the water's edge in a beautiful cantilevered boardwalk, but we'll also have a cycling multi-purpose trail that goes right through the periphery. And there's other enhancements to the already existing waterfront trail that exists today. So although we are talking about Pier 8 and this development on Pier 8, I think it's important to put Pier 8 in context to the rest of the West Harbour waterfront that already exists from Bayfront Park all the way to Eastwood Park.
Great, thank you. I've got a couple of questions here to read out, and I'm mindful of our time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. It says here, do we know how much residential square footage is estimated on blocks 1 to 15, and how much square feet would be added with a 45-story tower on 16? That's at 816. Maybe I'll come back to someone for that. And another question, is there a tall building? If there is a tall building, what buildings would be on the rest of the land? So I presume that relates to the rest of the land for block 16. So if there was a tall building, what buildings, if any, would be on the rest of the land?
Yeah, so the rest of Pier 8 is still intended to be developed for mid-rise. So that is still going to take place even if there isn't.
Which are a maximum.
We lost you there for a second, Calvin, and I started talking. Go ahead. You go ahead. No,
okay. So the plan for Pier 8 has a number of blocks with mid-rise buildings on it, which are a maximum height of 8 stories. So this one block we're looking at, Block 16, there are 15 other blocks that have moderately scaled buildings. And we're just looking at a mid-rise scenario for Block 16 as an option, and another option to look at a tall building on Block 16.
Right. I'm going to read a few questions from the bottom here. I want to make sure we get to all of them. So this is, if a tall building is approved by council, so that's if a tall building is approved by council, is it a given that it would be designed by the team from Waterfront Shores, i.e. Bruce, Cobera, etc., or could it be a competition? So that's a question potentially for Chris. And also, does the approval of a mid-size or tall building have a bearing on contract negotiations with Waterfront Shores? So putting you on the hot seat again, Chris.
So on the first, sorry, I kind of missed a bit of the second. On the first question, yes, the city has gone through a competition, an extensive competition of a request for qualifications, then a request for proposals. And Waterfront Shores Consortium is the winner of that, of which KPMB and Mr. Kubara, who was born actually in the north end of Hamilton, is the winner of that. So yes.
Great. And the next.
And I missed the other question.
I'll help you with that. So does the approval of a mid-size or tall building have a bearing on the contract negotiations with Waterfront Shores?
No, this development block was actually already included in the competition. So no, it doesn't at all.
Okay. And there was an individual wrote at 823, it should be noted that the approved height limit to Pier 8 is 8 stories and not 4 stories. I wonder if Alyssa, you could clarify that.
Block 16 actually has a height limit of 4 in the secondary plan.
This is for Pier 8. It's at 823. So I think the reference.
Pier 8 is 8 stories.
Great.
But for Block 16, it was actually only 4.
Okay, excellent. Excellent in the sense of thank you for clarifying. And I've got a few more questions that I wanted just to make sure we got to. So if the family units are spread out across the development and different developers could be doing this, would this force the last developer to build all family units?
So I think maybe I'll take that, but we've chosen the developer. It's Waterfront Shores Consortium, and that's who we're working with. So it's the same developer that is building the entire 9 development blocks of Pier 8, including Block 16.
Great. That clarifies. Thank you. I'm not sure if anyone has come back to 816 to the technical question on do we know how much residential square footage is estimated on blocks 1 to 15 and how much square footage would be added with a 45-story tower on block 16? Maybe that's a question we can provide in some of the Q&A. Go ahead.
Sorry, I would just kind of say, one, it's probably more technical. We would probably need to research that, but maybe Alyssa to kind of clarify. Am I correct? We actually, it'll be up to the developer as to how much actual space is put in any one of these blocks as they go to develop their project. What the city does is establishes minimum and maximum building heights, building envelopes.
Great, thank you. So I got 2 comments here, and then we're at 8:30. So in terms of, with regards to Kelvin's response regarding the setbacks, are the 3-story 5-meter terraces private or public? This says, I assume private. So why is city staff considering reducing the public green space setback to 25 meters? Perhaps there's some clarification on that. And why is city staff reducing this space compared to provincial standards? That's at 8:29. So Kelvin, maybe you could address that, and then we're probably at our wrap time, so which looks like we have considered or been able to get to most, if not all, questions. So that relates, that's at 8:29.
With respect to the 3rd story setback of 5 meters, the terraces would be part of the residential building, and those terraces would not be public. They might be common space shared by residents of that building. In terms of the second part of the question, I'm not really aware of what is meant by reducing the public green space setback to 25 meters. Our reference to 25 meters was simply the separation distance between the tower and the block 1 8-story building. Maybe there is some confusion about that.
Great. Well, hopefully that will clarify it. And a final question, what is the maximum height of a mid-sized building?
So for the purposes of our study, we have looked at a 12-story mid-rise building as being the maximum height for a mid-rise scenario.
Okay. Thank you. So it's just after 8:30. I want to thank everyone for their questions. There's lots of good content to look at and some comments to reflect on. And also would encourage you, we will put the recording of this presentation on the website. So it'll be the presentation only and not the questions. You want to be respectful on the questions, but there will be a feedback summary with the questions and responses in it, as well as putting those on the website. I think in the beginning, and Alyssa may remind you of this, please do go to the website if you'd like to, and you'll have an opportunity to then fill in the feedback survey. It's available right beside the virtual public meeting. It's about a 5 to 10 minute piece. And you can also fill out questions on the website and obviously email questions at any time to city staff. So thank you so much for participating this evening. We hope that it provided you some information and clarification, and certainly will enable you to continue your excellent work in pursuing and following up and being involved in this in the Pier 8 overall study. So Alyssa, if I could turn it back to you for your next steps, and then we'll conclude.
Great, thanks, Sue. So next steps, as Sue had said, please visit our website. We will be posting the draft urban design guidelines up there, as well as with these presentations that you have viewed tonight, the recording, and then there's a commenting sheet that will be available that will close on November 19th. As Sue said, we will be putting together a feedback summary report, documenting all the questions that were received tonight and the answers, and hopefully that will be available in December to post online for view. And then we are planning on bringing forward the final Pier 8 Block 16 guidelines based on comments we've received from the community and from staff and any edits we need to make, and presenting that to council for approval in January of 2021. And what we're hoping to do is send out a notification to everyone who is in attendance to this meeting tonight when that is going to Planning Committee and Council. And then once those guidelines are approved, then you can anticipate to see phase 2 of this project starting up sometime in January 2021, and that will be the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment being brought forward, and there'll be opportunities for public participation in that process as well. So our contact information is below. Please feel free to reach out to myself or Jennifer if you have any questions or clarifications about the study or about anything related to this process. And that's about it. Thank you very much for attending tonight.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. And we will be leaving the meeting now.